Hi everyone, welcome to a new webinar of the Bankinter Innovation Foundation. So we are gonna give like a few more seconds so people can join because there are a lot of people waiting to get into the webinar. So let's give like a few seconds so we can start with a nice audience waiting for us. Okay, I think we can start. So again, thank you so much for being today with us in a new session of Exploring the Horizon of Innovation. It is a pleasure to greet our audience in this monthly series dedicated to the expert who are defining the future. Os hablo un poquito en español también, por supuesto. Muchos de los ponentes de esa serie de webinars que empezamos a principios de año son miembros distinguidos de nuestro Future Trends Forum. Es el think tank en España de la Fundación Innovación Bankinter y es el único think tank centrado en ciencia y tecnología. Venimos de un mes extraordinario donde contamos con Backlap Smith, que nos dio una visión magistral y realista sobre los desafíos energéticos actuales. Pero queremos también que este espacio que empezamos a principios de año sea una referencia mensual con la vanguardia del pensamiento. Por ello, les adelantamos que en los próximos meses nuestra serie continuará con invitados de la talla de Francis Collins, que es exdirector de los Institutos Nacionales de Salud de Estados Unidos y líder del proyecto Genoma Humano. También en el mes de junio contaremos con Michael López Alegría, una auténtica leyenda de la exploración espacial y actual comandante de misiones espaciales. But today we are joining once again with Frances Sellers, who is the senior editor of the Washington Post, who is going to talk today with Dr. Tammy Ma. Tammy leads the initial fusion energy initiative in the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, the institution that made history in 2022 by achieving controlled ignition in a fusion reactor for the first time. So following the conversation between Frances and Tammy, we will have a Q&A session. So I encourage all of you to make any question that you want at any time during the talk. But today, we dive into the energy that powers the stars. Frances, Tammy, thank you so much to both of you for being today with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having us today. It's a huge honor to be part of this series, Horizons of Innovation. I love the title. And it feeds into the work that the Bankinter Innovation Foundation has been doing over the past few months. Last summer, we met about fusion energy, and I'm now delighted to welcome Tammy Ma to talk to us about what's going on in fusion. Tammy, a very warm welcome to this new series, Horizons of Innovation.
Thank you so much, Frances, and thank you, Marcy and the Foundation, for covering fusion. We're really excited to be able to spend some time talking about this today.
So, Tammy, I have a big first question, and that is, what's all this interest in fusion about right now? What's going on?
Yeah, I think the excitement that you are seeing around the world right now is a confluence of a lot of elements. Certainly in 2022, as Marcy alluded to, we achieved ignition at the National Ignition Facility, the NIF, here at Lawrence Livermore National Lab in California. And what that did was demonstrate the scientific feasibility of fusion, because we were able to get more energy out than the energy it took in to run this fusion reaction. And that opens the door to harness this for a clean, abundant energy source. But it's not only that. It's not just that one scientific breakthrough. There's been a lot of great scientific progress around the world on different facilities. We are seeing new technologies coming up, and then certainly a huge amount of government interest from many different countries, including Spain and across Europe, and then a lot of investment and new private companies coming up as well. So we'll dig into it more over the next hour, but certainly it's a confluence of all of these things that is creating all of this excitement in fusion right now. And I will also comment, with all of the things happening around the world right now, all of the geopolitics going on, what it really underscores is the importance of energy and energy security and energy sovereignty for our countries. And so that's why there's so much interest in fusion as a potential energy source right now.
I'm going to be asking you about AI and how that feeds into this whole equation later on. But take us back, Tammy, to that moment in 2022, December the 5th, turning into December the 6th, right? You had this breakthrough that you've referred to. What happened? Tell us a little bit about the backstory for you, but actually what was going on at the National Ignition Facility at that moment?
Yeah, so the National Ignition Facility, the NIF, is the world's largest, most energetic laser. It is a big facility that we basically run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week here at Livermore. And we are constantly doing experiments. We first turned on in about 2009. We've been doing experiments just continuously. And what happened in 2022 was we were doing our next experiment where we used deuterium tritium fuel in our fusion capsule. We were trying new designs where we had turned up the laser energy. We had played with different materials, how we point the lasers, and that experiment we were able to actually achieve ignition. And the team here at NIF is quite large, as you would imagine, several hundred people. Not everybody is here all the time running the facility, right? But what happened was overnight, around, I think it was like 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning, the shot goes off. And as usual, everyone has to wait for the data to come in. Right. But we knew it was a really big, successful shot because some of our immediate diagnostics, they start going off and they just like shoot.
What? I mean, this is crazy, right? Alarms ringing and lights going out.
Yeah, and then I think that the strongest indication was actually the halogen light bulbs. They got blown out by the large neutron yield, and so we didn't have numbers yet for the data coming in, but we knew something big had happened. And the next morning, when everybody was coming back into work, it started out as little whispers that like, oh, I think something big happened. But we've also been trained to be very careful over the years. And so we didn't want to go out and announce some big breakthrough until we had time to actually sort through the data and make sure we had analyzed many different detectors, right, so that everything was consistent, and put error bars on our data as well. But we knew something big was going on, and then we all got to work, trying to analyze that data as fast as possible.
I'd love you now to step back and tell us exactly. I mean, we hear about replicating the sun on Earth, but tell us a little bit about why and how inertial fusion works, and then maybe after that we can go into some of the other technologies like using magnets. But first of all, I'd love just sort of a lay discussion of what are you doing with inertial fusion? Why is that your technology of choice? And then we can talk about the other technologies.
Yeah. So like you said, Francis, fusion is the process that powers the sun, right? And the idea is you take a light element. In our case, we're going to use deuterium and tritium. They are isotopes of hydrogen, heavy hydrogen, that you get them to fuse by applying huge amounts of pressure, get them up to high temperature, high density. The sun does it with enormous amounts of gravity because it's large. Here on Earth, we don't have that access to that kind of gravity. So what are some of the other options? In some approaches, we use very large magnets, such as in tokamaks or stellarators to contain the plasma. In inertial fusion, instead, what you're trying to do is typically compress and heat that DT using lasers or sometimes pulse power, sometimes heavy ions. The approach that we chose to go with here at Livermore is using large lasers. And the reason why is because Livermore is the laser lab. We've, since the beginning of our founding, people joke sometimes that LLNL, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, actually stands for lasers, nothing but lasers. And so that is our big expertise. Yeah. And so over time, we have continuously increased our understanding of laser interactions with matter, with plasmas, and we knew that using lasers, we would have a very good chance of demonstrating fusion in the laboratory. And so that's why we went with this particular approach.
Tammy, again, I'm thinking about squeezing something. It tends to burst out of the sides if you try and squeeze something. And I think your work has been related, right, to try and keep the compression even. How did that happen, and what contribution did you make to that process?
Yeah, so the name of the game here is we're creating a miniature star on Earth by squeezing and compressing, like you said, Francis. And of course, it's not just getting to a round little ball, it's while you are squeezing, you have to stay as round as possible to get the physics.
I'm imagining a balloon sort of bursting out of the sides if you squish it.
That's exactly right. If you try to squeeze a balloon between your fingers, everywhere it can, that balloon's going to squeeze back out. So it's really difficult to stay spherical the entire time. So the approach that we used here on NIF is we have a little capsule that is inside a little canister. So imagine a soup can, but about the size of an eraser. It is hollow. And there's holes on either end. And so what we do is we bring the lasers in and they shoot the inside wall of that cylinder. Ooh, I've got one right here. There's a
You have one. Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So it's quite I don't know if that's viewable.
I
Yeah,
can
so
see
that
it. I
little
hope our
red
audience
pellet,
can too. Yeah.
that little red pellet is our capsule. It's about 2 millimeters in diameter, and it's going to sit in the middle of a little canister that is about 1 centimeter in length, 0.5 centimeter in diameter. And again, so the laser comes and it hits the walls of that canister rather than the capsule itself, and it creates a bath of X-rays. So just like your oven at home that you fill with infrared, with heat to try to bake your pie, here we're going to try to fill our little canister with X-rays to bake our capsule. And why did we go with this particular approach? It's exactly for the reason you said, Francis. The symmetry and the compression is so important. By having this oven, we can try to fill it uniformly with X-rays to get as spherical as possible during that compression. And one of my first, I'll say, assignments, on the NIF here at Livermore, was to develop X-ray imaging so that we could view the capsule as it was being compressed and as it got super hot, super dense, and released a burst of X-rays, and see how spherical we are, and then figure out where we need to make adjustments so that we can maintain that symmetry.
Oh, you had that big success in 2022, the end of 2022. We're now in 2026, and you've replicated that success, correct?
That is correct. We've replicated that success 9 more times. So in total, we have achieved ignition 10 times on the NIF. Our highest performing shot was April of last year, April of 2025, where we got over 8.6 megajoules of energy out. And what that means is a gain of 4.1. So 4 times more energy out than went in with the lasers.
So I look at that with some excitement and then think, how far are we from commercialization of this? It's you haven't gone from there to keeping my lights on. So what's the next step in that process?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We are getting a better and better handle on the physics. There's still lots of engineering to do. Using the approach that we have here on the NIF, if you were to turn that into an inertial fusion energy power plant, what you would do is you'd actually have to get to even higher gains than this gain of 4 that we've achieved, on the order of 50 to 100. So 50 to 100 times more energy out than you put in. Yeah, absolutely. And that's because you have to generate enough energy that it would actually be commercially viable to use that energy to run the lasers themselves and to feed out to the grid. right? You'd also have to repeat the experiments, the implosion at about 10 hertz, 10 times per second. We have to figure out wall materials that will survive these extreme conditions. We have to figure out how you're going to manufacture enough targets that you can shoot continuously. Many engineering challenges still to work through. But I'll also say that for a self-sustaining power, a demonstration facility, right, using this approach to fusion, meaning if you wanted just to have a demonstration power plant that generated enough energy to run itself and not feed energy out of the grid, you only need a gain of about 15.
That's much closer.
Yeah, so we actually expect to get there over the next couple years on the NIF.
Wow.
And looking at our rate of progress since the NIF is turned on, this gain of 15 is probably a conservative estimate too.
Exciting. So there really are you're seeing some horizons that you could meet in the next few years.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now, I do want to underscore there are still many different challenges that we have to work on. The NIF is an experimental facility. It's not a power plant. We don't intend to turn it into a power plant ever.
Right.
But this is why it's such an exciting moment in time, and we need the entire international community coming together to solve all of these different problems. We don't expect to be able to do it alone.
So let's just step back a little bit and talk about the kinds of startups. I think this is of interest all around the world, but certainly in the States, in Virginia, for example, a private company is starting to build, right? Using tokamaks, using a different approach to fusion energy. Where do you see the potential there? And maybe where do you see the potential for public-private partnerships as well in this?
Yeah, there's been quite a few different fusion startup companies now even starting to cite where their power plant might be. Just a little more background. Currently, there's over 55 different fusion companies, kind of startups spread all around the world, over $11 billion that's been invested from the private sector into fusion in recent years. And so this company in Virginia that you're referring to, Francis, is Commonwealth Fusion Systems. They are working on a tokamak design. So it's these large magnets. But what they were able to do was develop these high temperature superconducting magnets that are very strong, that can operate at temperatures that are not crazy. And what this does is can shrink the size of the overall tokamak quite a bit. And that allows them to build, experiment, iterate very quickly because of the smaller size. And so, these Commonwealth, but a few other companies as well have started siting, have started figuring out where they're actually going to put their power plants and starting to sign power purchase agreements, in fact, with utilities in the local area. And so what that means is not only are we pushing really hard on the technology to deliver power plants, but you're also seeing engagement with the public sector, with the regulatory, with government in order to bring all these things together to get a power plant off the ground. And that's a really exciting step to see.
Tell me a little bit more about what's going on in Europe. I know about ITER, which of course is a big intergovernmental approach in the south of France, but there's also startup energy there, and there are fusion clusters, for example, outside Oxford. What are you seeing, as I know you travel a lot, throughout Europe in their approach to fusion energy?
Yeah, what we're actually seeing is at the highest levels of government, there is incredible interest in fusion. And these governments, Germany, the UK, Europe as a whole are starting to put together roadmaps, and they're putting out reports that analyze and look at the potential of fusion and how it can fit into their energy infrastructure. And so having that backing from the highest levels and thinking of what a full roadmap might look like to get fusion on the grid. And this is not just the scientists in the lab, figuring out how to create the little star, but it's also how do you bring up the full ecosystem? So the supply chain, the vendors, how do we all share the work too, right? This is such a big challenge that, Germany is looking at how they can apply their expertise in manufacturing and production to perhaps building the targets or coming up with enough components for the lasers. France is leaning into their longstanding expertise with simulation codes, building large infrastructure. In the UK, there is this campus, like you mentioned, Francis, the Column campus, where they're doing something really innovative. They're doing the foundational research, but it's also a campus where fusion companies can come and site there. Actually have their offices there. So it's this entire ecosystem where they can interact with a larger community, and then they can all tap into resources. So what's fun is there's all of these different innovation models that you see popping up in fusion. And then also the government infrastructure trying to figure out, well, how do we foster growth, not just in the public sector, but how do we make it so that VCs and investors want to start companies in European countries as well. Everyone's just trying to figure it out as we go.
You take me right to another question, and that is about nuclear science in general. I mean, you're a plasma physicist. You work not only in fusion, you have a background, and the experiments at the NIF are also around nuclear weapons, right? I mean, there's a whole broad interest here in nuclear science. Fusion is often described as safe. What are the risks and what's the acceptability? I mean, a country like France is very accustomed to nuclear fission energy and has accepted it, but there's a perception issue here as well as a science and technology issue, and I'd love you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when you say that we do nuclear science and weapons science at the NIF, that's absolutely right. The NIF is actually funded by the National Nuclear Security Administration here in the US, and they have the mandate to actually maintain the safety, security, and reliability of our nation's nuclear stockpile. And so the experiments that we do on the NIF, including in fusion, what that enables us to do is generate conditions similar to what we have in nuclear weapons, but at very, very micro scale. So,
right.
The extreme temperatures, densities, pressures, and then we can study at very high precision those conditions and then use what we learn to put into our simulation codes and then ensure that our US stockpile stays safe. Now, we are not designing or creating new nuclear weapons on the NIF, right? And fusion in general, we say, is very safe. Now, the reason why is because fusion's hard. It's so hard because you have to deliver enormous amounts of energy into the system first to make fusion happen. So if you want fusion to stop, it's very easy. You turn off the lasers, you would turn off the magnets. And in terms of issues like proliferation, right, there's been studies going on, we continue to look at this issue here at Livermore, whether it is magnetic fusion or inertial fusion, the proliferation questions are the same. It is just that we're creating huge amounts of neutrons. And with neutrons, that is typically how you would enrich fissile material. But it doesn't matter if it's magnetic or inertial fusion there. It's about the number of neutrons. But neutrons, we know how to handle really well. And honestly, if you wanted to go enrich, there are much easier ways to do it than building a fusion reactor. And so yes, there are risks, and we want to be upfront and transparent about all of this. However, we also need to understand. We also need to be clear-eyed about it, right? That those risks are not necessarily greater than some other approaches, and just know that we have, put good regulations and rules and safety standards in place to manage it all.
So I'm thinking in regulatory terms, and I walk quite happily, although with a little caution, I would say, into a hospital that has got nuclear medicine going on, into labs. I'm told of risks if I have to go into that sort of area. Is that the way you think that fusion energy should be regulated rather than like fission?
Um, for quite a few years into the future, regulating fusion like medical applications is the right approach. And that's because it will be a while before we get into a full facility running at full scale. And regulating as medical nuclear gives us the flexibility while still saying safe. It's the adequate level of safety, right, to do this innovation. Now, when you turn into a full power plant, there will be, in many cases, large amounts of tritium that we will need to inventory and keep track of. There is radiation, low levels of radiation, depending on the materials you select for your power plant, that you do need to watch out for. But I think we can accelerate the entire nuclear field by having, I'd say, measured amounts of standards in place and not over regulating, and making sure we understand each of the individual risks and putting good protocols in place. But there needs to be a balance. And I think worldwide, we've seen in the past that when you overregulate, it will drive up the costs and the overall just complexity of the system so much that it's not necessarily a better solution, for all of society.
Just paint a little bit more of a picture for me, because I think of, I'm British by origin. I know where the nuclear fission plants are. I mean, they're famously located in certain parts of Britain. What does a fusion energy system look like in your imagined future? Would each city, would we have micro plants? Would every house have a few? I have no idea what the pattern would look like and what the distribution of that energy would look like onto the grid.
So
Renewables have changed my view of producing my own power.
yeah, absolutely. It's envisioned that fusion power plants will be hundreds of megawatt, gigawatt type scales. So that's kind of similar in scale to fission plants of today, or many of our coal power plants as well. In terms of size of infrastructure for that level of energy, it is, again, similar to fission nuclear plants in size. And so, in fact, as many of these companies go out and look for places to site, they're actually going out to, discontinued either coal or fission places. Now, one of the advantages of fusion is we do say that it is base load power, meaning it can be that reliable energy source you need after the sun goes down or after the wind stops running, right? And so we do envision that they're kind of these centralized power plants that tap into existing grids of today, and then can provide the backup to other, for example, renewable energy sources. And if you're running these, gigawatt type scale power plants,
Right.
You'll need one per big city, the size of, San Francisco or New York. And then in many cases, another one of the advantages of fusion is you do have a little bit of flexibility in turning up or down how much energy you are producing at that moment in time. So potentially, some of the advantages are you would not necessarily need to use battery storage. But I think this is one of the next steps we really need to do as a community is figuring out really the logistics of how fusion would fit into existing energy grids of today, meeting different energy demands and use patterns in different localities and regions, and then using that to guide our technology development as well.
Takes me straight to two questions that have been hovering over this conversation. One is, to what extent do you think this could address our climate challenges, reduce our carbon footprints? And secondly, energy equity. We have the developing world in huge need of energy. Sometimes we introduce new technologies and think, oh my goodness, it's going to make things better for everybody, and then it doesn't. So can you address both those things, first the climate and then energy equity, and tell me where fusion could fit into those equations?
Yeah, so fusion, the reaction to generate the fusion energy is entirely carbon free, right? If you're doing DT fusion, you're fusing a deuterium plus a tritium, creating a helium nucleus. There's just carbon doesn't show up in that equation, right? And so it does absolutely have the potential to help us with the climate issues, particularly as our energy demands go up, right? And we have an opportunity now to really select which energy sources we're going to invest into to build out this capacity for the future. Now, of course, you know, we'll have to go about the entire process sustainably as well, right? You know, as we manufacture the components that we need for fusion, as we figure out, you know, how we're going to deal with the low levels of radioactive waste that are created, low levels, not high. You know, we have to keep all of this in mind to try to stay as sustainable as possible. But the fact that fusion can provide so much energy means that it could significantly contribute to helping us control the carbon levels. Now, on your second question, Francis, on equity, you know, because of all these positives of fusion, we absolutely want fusion deployed everywhere around the world, right? And you know, fusion is not dependent on geography, right? Conceivably, a fusion power plant can be placed almost anywhere, and you just have to ship your fusion fuel in if you don't have, you know, access to ocean water right close by, for example. So not a problem. Now, I think why it's such a race right now in fusion is because we understand the enormous stakes. It's not only about getting to energy and having access to that energy. It's whoever gets to fusion first sets the standards, sets the regulations, sets how this technology is deployed. So we absolutely want fusion to be deployed in a democratic and fair way. And so this is why the US is trying so hard to move fast in partnership with our allied country friends. And of course, you know, once you have fusion, what that represents is potentially energy sovereignty, energy security for each state. It means you can actually harness other technologies that are very energy demanding. So things like carbon capture, things like desalination, and right. AI as well, right? And so that's why, yeah.
You are anticipating all my questions because AI, okay. AI you have described as one of the factors that could help advance fusion, speed things along. We have this convergence of new technologies and AI. It's also an energy guzzler, there's no doubt about it. So give me those two sides of that coin and try and tell us a little bit about where AI fits into the future of this energy-hungry planet.
Yeah, so it's a really exciting relationship we have right now between AI and fusion. So AI will absolutely help us to accelerate learning in fusion. There's no question about that. Many of our plasma codes, as we're just trying to do the physics piece of things, are very intensive codes. Deploying AI to help us look for interesting physics parameters or physics phenomena that we can then test in the laboratory is enormous. Applying AI as we move to automated operations of many of our facilities and running the robotics, using AI to do materials discovery, to help us find materials that can actually survive in these extreme environments. And so fantastic. However, to also run AI and tap into the power of AI, we're going to need new energy sources. And so fusion could absolutely be part of the answer to that. And so it's this really synergistic cycle, of course, that we're seeing.
Interesting. And do you see it moving? I mean, fusion, as you've described, as still fairly distant accomplishment to get into the grid. AI is moving so quickly with the growth of data centers right now. Is fusion in any way? I mean, maybe it can compensate later, but can it help us on the way?
Well, we're moving as fast as we can, I would say. Yeah. And I think, all estimates show that our energy demands are only going to continue to grow for the next few decades due to AI. So even if we can't get fusion on the grid in just the next couple of years, it will still have an enormous role to play in later helping us meet those energy demands. And of course, it's clean as well, right? And so it can help us actually kill multiple birds, just with a single stone.
Do we have audience questions coming in? But before we get to them, I would love to ask you a little bit about your background. You've told me in the past that you thought about becoming an astronaut. You've also told me you thought about becoming a journalist. You ended up as a plasma physicist, and you've talked to me as well about the importance of mentorship. Can you give us a little bit of an understanding of that and how you got to where you are and what responsibility you feel for developing talent for what you describe as a very innovative and exciting future?
Yeah, I have always loved science, just the idea of being able to participate in the process of discovery and figuring out new things and really shaping the future comes through a lot of, science and technology R&D. And the other thing I love about science is actually the community, right? The people. And exactly as you said, Francis, I have been incredibly lucky to have great mentoring over the years. Folks that really fostered early career staff and give you opportunities. And I love that science is not just about being in the laboratory, it's also about communicating. It's also about working with government policymakers, and it's about inspiring the next generation as well. And it's always been something fun that I love to do, but now there's actually an urgent need as well, because we have to bring up the workforce in fusion. Not only plasma physicists, not only PhD scientists, but we need engineers and techs across a wide breadth of fields. And it is up to us to figure out how we're going to bring people on board and get them trained and ready for what could be an entirely new economy as we develop the technologies, but then later on running the fusion power plants as well. And so we work here at Lawrence Livermore, we work with the UK, we work with the IAEA to, help do lectures and, summer schools. We bring in hundreds of interns a year just in the fusion laser area alone. And hopefully build out that pipeline over time. That's what's really needed.
Very exciting. I'm going to turn to some of the audience questions, which I'm going to read now. The first one I see is many fusion breakthroughs focus on achieving ignition, but scaling to commercial power plants involves major challenges such as tritium supply, neutron-resistant materials, and overall system efficiency. In your view, which of these engineering bottlenecks is currently the most critical for commercial deployment, and what progress would need to happen before fusion becomes economically viable for the energy market? So a little bit of a twist on what we were talking about earlier on, but let's dig deeper into that question.
Yeah, excellent question. Each of these technologies, there is ongoing work in each of these areas. One of the biggest challenges I would say is scale up. So, for example, with the tritium supply and the overall fuel cycle, in the laboratory, we've been working through different solutions for tritium breeding materials, how you extract the tritium after it is bred. How do you do the recycling? And in most cases, for all of these different challenges, there are what we expect to be our solutions, right? Things can, of course, be a lot more optimized as well. But for the moment, we think in most cases there are actual solutions for each of these items. However, we also, in most cases, have not demonstrated at scale, right?
Okay.
Solving tritium in the lab is not the same as doing it in a power plant yet. And then bringing all these subsystems together, incredibly complex machine and infrastructure, that also will be a big challenge.
Okay, another question. I'm not sure if you're seeing it too. How energy could be removed from the fusion canister and transformed into electricity? How is it possible to manage high temperature gaps starting from 10 and
10 to the 8th, yeah.
10 to the 8th, yes, and reducing to a level that can be managed with the current technology level? I'm sorry if I mangled that slightly, but
so in our approach and in many of the fusion approaches, the energy is coming out in the form of neutrons. Neutrons are neutral particles, so they travel through, and it takes good materials that you select carefully of particular densities and thicknesses to stop those neutrons. And by stopping the neutrons and slowing them down, what you're doing is transferring their energy from kinetic energy of motion into heat. And so once you have heat, you are then running a steam turbine that you then create electricity from. So the energy comes out in neutrons. And in our case, we've got the capsule sitting inside the little canister. The lasers basically blow up the canister completely. And then the fusion happens, and then the neutrons just stream everywhere.
So another question, again, it relates to what we were saying earlier on. It relates to the two main technologies, the inertial and magnetic. And the question is, what do you think is the one that's approaching faster to the industrial stage?
I will say if anybody answers that definitively, they are lying to you.
Oh, okay, go. Tell us why.
We are so far away with all the different fusion approaches, we don't know what the answer really is yet. And all of them still have enormous challenges to overcome. So with inertial fusion, this is the only approach that's achieved ignition and energy gain, right? And so in that sense, we have a better handle on the physics of the plasmas. And then in the magnetic fusion sphere, they've concentrated a lot of their efforts on the engineering of the full power plant. However, if you break down into each of the different subsystems, there are pros and cons, and you can evaluate specifically how that technology compares. And you do have to do that because there are often significant differences in the requirements for those different subsystems. Now, for example, another one is materials, right? I said a little bit, the walls, the blankets and walls of your chamber where your fusion is going on, there still needs to be a lot of materials development in that regime. Now, for inertial fusion, the implosion actually happens in the center of a large chamber, and the plasma is typically far away from the walls. So in those cases, there are some material solutions off the shelf today, things like certain types of steel that can actually be sufficient for what we would need for a power plant today. We're not waiting on new materials discovery there. in magnetic fusion, because in many cases the plasma is almost directly interacting, touching the walls, it's a much more extreme plasma state that they have to try to find new materials that could withstand operations for many years in that case. However, there are pros and cons in, the amount of other particles coming out. The assault on the materials is a little bit different. And so it's an unsatisfactory answer, but really you do have to dig in a few steps deeper to really figure out, which one is more advanced in which area. The other thing is you want to look at is how robust and how mature is the overall supply chain, because it's not just about building one prototype demonstration facility. It's how are you going to mass manufacture, and how are you going to have all of those different components that you need. So you also want to take a look at some of the adjacent spin out technologies that might be able to help you actually drive the single component that you need in a way that is economical and actually viable.
I mean, I have another question for you, and it's really about this notion of science diplomacy, which you've raised with me in the past. Some of the science we're talking about now is very, very hard for policymakers, legislators, and other people to understand. And I think we see that happening with other technologies, AI, for example. It's hard for people to get their heads around what you're talking about. What's the role going ahead of people like you who, as I said, thought about being a journalist at one point and are deeply invested in the science, in communicating the science? And I'll take this even to my everyday life. I understand, I can look at a child playing with a typewriter and they understand what's going on. They press a key and they see what happens. The separation from the other tools they're playing with every day in their everyday lives is so hard for them to understand that there's a gulf growing between our daily lives and the technologies we're using. What's the role of science diplomacy, or people like you, to try to convey difficult science in these critical areas?
I think it's actually a trend that we're seeing across all of science, that science is becoming more complex and larger scale, such that the scientists themselves become more and more separated from the foundational equations in science that needs to be done.
I have to take a leap of faith to believe you, right? I have to believe in you're not, to some extent, I have to take a leap of faith rather than understanding each step.
Yeah. And so that is entirely on us, the scientists ourselves, to better communicate what it is we're doing, and to take the time to learn ourselves and to train the next generation that, you shouldn't just be running a computer simulation code. You should, to a large extent, try to understand the guts. Right. And as we're doing experiments on the NIF that take a few hundred people, right, we need to make sure our experimentalists still get hands-on experience working in smaller scale labs as well, so they can build up that experimental intuition. And so I think it's both a challenge within the field itself. How do we, as we build up this workforce pipeline that I talked about earlier, make sure that folks are getting good foundational understanding of the original systems that we can build off of, but then also communicating that out to the public and to our policymakers in a way that is transparent, right? We definitely don't want to hide behind the complexities. It is on us to explain well, and then define things in a way that the public understands and our own field understands. So fusion itself, when you get scientists amongst ourselves, we will often argue about what different definitions and metrics are. And that's very healthy. But we need to be able to clearly explain that to each other and to the outside, because it's actually one of the challenges in defining progress in fusion. You'll see, news articles coming out, this new breakthrough. What do they actually mean? Sometimes we have trouble explaining to ourselves. And if we can't figure that out, we're going to continue to hinder ourselves as well. Folks are not going to keep investing. Government's going to lose interest if we're announcing breakthroughs that are actually not significant every day, right?
Absolutely. Takes us back to your point about the 2022 breakthrough. Let's get to another audience question. This one is, which fusion, I think it's going to go back to, which fusion method do you think has the most promising future? Tokamaks with the larger radius, it's pretty, such as ITER, or greater magnetic field strength, such as spark, or perhaps stellarator? Or are you more of a fan of inertial confinement, even though there seems to be a bottleneck in the cadence and field management? So this gets us also to different kinds of magnetic approaches. Over to you.
Yeah, of course, I'm going to be a little bit biased because I've devoted my life to inertial confinement. To my previous comment, we try really, really hard to demonstrate and communicate out that progress that we're making, which is real progress. But I'll say, like, where we are with fusion right now, we really do want to foster many different approaches. I'll say even whoever gets to a fusion power plant first, that is almost definitely not going to be the most optimal design, right? Even with fission, nuclear fission power plants today, they're not even close to optimized. So where we are now, we really do want to carry these many different approaches and look at all the different pros and cons. Because like I said, it's not just ultimately what gets you the highest gain. It's what actually makes sense in terms of the materials, in terms of bringing the subsystems together, in terms of the overall economics and supply chain, right? If one certain country, decides that they are going to lock up the market for some component that we need in fusion, and then the rest of the world can access it, right? That is also going to change our thinking significantly, right? So for the moment, we really do want to diversify. Now, fusion is capital intensive. You do need a certain scale of facility to actually make it happen.
Remind us how much money was put into the NIF. I mean, it's billions. Right?
Yeah, that's right. So the NIF construction costs $3.5 billion. So that's pretty standard for kind of large scale science projects. So a Mars mission is typically on that order. So it's not out of the realm of big science, and it's bringing up energy infrastructure costs quite a lot in general. But the point is. Where I was going with this was that at some point, yes, governments and nations will need to down select, right? Even here in the U.S., we cannot carry all of these different approaches to full maturity. It's just intensive, and so I think what we're trying to do here in the U.S. is at least figure out these really good, clear metrics that are scientifically backed for how we will start the down selection process, hopefully over the next couple of years, and then have both public and private working together towards these approaches that we think have the highest potential.
I think we're running out of time, but I have one last question for you. And that is that fusion has become something that people are talking about. What's the biggest myth out there that you wish people would stop talking about, stop believing in?
What's the biggest myth?
What's the one
I might get a lot of folks in the fusion ecosystem upset at me, but I do think it is a myth that we'll be able to deliver energy to the grid in just the next couple of years. There is just still too much development that needs to be done. We haven't sorted out fully the regulatory, building these large infrastructure does take time. Getting it operating smoothly takes time. And why I say that is the biggest myth is it does have the potential of hurting our field enormously when promises are not kept. But it doesn't change the enormous potential of fusion and how great this technology actually is. And so that's why, we want to work hard to get out there and get, fact-based information out to those that care.
I'm taking away from this, be excited, but don't be too excited.
Oh no, absolutely be excited. The momentum that you're seeing right now is
Okay.
enormous, but there
That's
is also
fantastic.
hype, and that's
Okay.
there's hype.
Well, we have to wrap up. Tammy, thank you so much for a very, very interesting discussion. And thank
Thank
you
you.
so much also to the Bank Inter Innovation Foundation for hosting this and for future elements in this series, which will include the NIH director, former NIH director Francis Collins next month, and after him, the very well-known Spanish-American astronaut who's led tourism flights and now is in commercial space, Michael Lopez Alegria. I'm going to hand over back to Marcy to close up.
Yeah, thank you so much to both of you, Frances and Tammy. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. Y a la audiencia os indico que la semana que viene volvemos a tener otro webinar, en este caso también sobre fusión con Carlos Alejandre, y seguiremos promocionando la energía de fusión. Tenemos una oportunidad ahí. España tiene una oportunidad desde el punto de vista de libridones. En Sevilla tenemos el tokamak dentro de la Universidad de Sevilla, tenemos CIEMAT. Y hay muchísimas empresas que están hoy por hoy en España que están trabajando dentro del supply chain de energía de fusión. O sea que os emplazo a la siguiente entrevista que tenemos la semana que viene y muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much, Frances, Tammy. It's a real pleasure.
Good.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.